Yeah, it's awesome. I'm really happy to live here. Very close. It's like a 30-minute drive. My mom lives there, like, right downtown, so it's really cool. Yeah.
All right, we are live for episode number 6, I believe this is, of Mental Health Chat. Welcome, everybody. I am Mental Health Matt, as you can imagine from the caption below me right here. And I'm joined today by Dr. Alex Chauran. So welcome, Dr. Alex. Do you want to call? Do we call you Alex? Do we call you Doc? What do we call you?
You can call me Doc. It's my nickname.
Doc is good. All right. Well, welcome. We're happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Good to be here. I really, really believe in what you do.
Cool. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm always glad to hear anything positive in that regard. You know, it's nice to get that positive feedback. Awesome. So, Dr. Alex, you have a pretty long story to tell in terms of mental health, and I think when it comes to introducing you as a whole, you have a bio that's all kinds of different things, right? You're a poker streamer. What's your doctorate in, by the way? I didn't actually ask you that yet.
Public administration, world domination.
Okay. Interesting. So you've got that doctorate going on. You're an author. You've got a book coming out, which I'm sure we'll talk about. All kinds of other things on your bio. So let's go. Let's kind of keep it focused on the mental health side, and we'll go back to sort of the beginning of your mental health story, because you're a sufferer of schizophrenia, which is an illness that I think a lot of people probably are lacking familiarity with. I think a lot of people, they kind of are aware that it's a thing, but largely I feel like they don't really have people in their lives that suffer from it in the way that people might be familiar with depression, anxiety, things like that. So tell us a little bit about your illness and about how it started for you.
Sure. Schizophrenia is a misunderstood illness. It's not the same thing as split personalities. I don't have split personalities. That's dissociative identity disorder. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder. And what psychosis is it's experiencing, seeing, hearing, sensing things that are not real.
Right.
And so that's part of schizophrenia is hallucinations. Now, hallucinations can be visual, they can be auditory, or they could even be tactile and olfactory. So you can smell things that aren't there. In fact, That's apparently a sign of stroke, if you smell like burning tires or oranges when there's not those things there.
Yeah.
So you can have tactile hallucinations as well. So all those things. You also have delusions and disordered thinking. So that means believing things that aren't true. And because those beliefs come from your own brain, which is the same place where you decide whether things are true or not, then those things might be really ridiculous and you still think they're true.
Right.
And of course, the third most important thing that's in all diagnostic criteria is that these things have to really impact your life negatively. Right. And I say that because lots of normal people will hear a voice call their name while they're falling asleep or while they're in the shower, and they'll freak out and think that they're going crazy, right? And it's not schizophrenia if it's not affecting your life negatively.
I see. Okay. And from what you've told me already prior to the show today, your diagnosis came when you were fairly young. Is that right? Or you started experiencing symptoms when you were fairly young, I guess.
Yeah, actually, schizophrenia tends to come in the late teens and early adulthood.
Okay.
And they think that the reason for this is that during your teenage years, you have a natural pruning of your gray matter. So what happens is your brain starts to eliminate a little bit of the gray matter that is not necessary. And this is a natural process. But in schizophrenics, it goes a little too far. And that's why schizophrenics will typically have enlarged ventricles in brain scans, because some of that gray matter is missing. And also what is happening is that your brain's neurons have these little myelin sheaths around them. And what those myelin sheaths do is they stop the wires from getting crossed in your brain, basically, and having something that's supposed to go to your hearing go to your visual cortex and stuff like that. And in schizophrenics, those myelin sheaths get stripped away. And so those wires get easily crossed.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like you, at least during the course of your illness, have become very familiar with the biological basis for all of these things, right? You've probably had to do a fair bit of learning there, I guess.
I really highly recommend a book. This is a book that I read at the beginning of my diagnosis, and I gave it to my parents. I made everybody in my life read it, and it's called Surviving Schizophrenia by Dr. E. Fuller Torrey.
Okay.
And it's really a great book. It really does describe all of these biological basics. And I firmly believe that like in 100 years, schizophrenia is not going to be considered mental illness anymore. It's going to be considered a neurological disorder.
I see. Do you think there's a particular reason why it's not currently considered a neurological disorder?
I think honestly, just kind of path dependence. Schizophrenia is one of the most oldest and stable mental illness diagnoses that
Mm-hmm.
we have, right? You know, in Victorian times, we had mental illnesses like glove apnea, but we didn't have dissociative identity disorder, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when societies and cultures change and pressures on people change, I think that people have different mental illnesses as a result. But schizophrenia has been really relatively stable. And I think that it's just always been considered a mental illness. And so it's funded as a mental illness.
I see.
And you know how that works.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think that going back to that idea of it being something that tends to crop up in early life. Do you feel like that the discovery of your symptoms and things like that? Do you feel like that played a big role in just really shifting your trajectory as to how you developed when you were younger?
100%. One thing that you say, where you say I developed it young is actually, I feel like a lot of people experience mental illness in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't start experiencing what I think may have been psychosis. I still don't know because at the time I wasn't diagnosed.
Right.
But I didn't experience that until I was in my late teens in high school. And so I feel like a lot of people start experiencing the whispers of depression or anxiety when they're much, much, much younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I had a childhood that was normal, right? And so I was super normal and I was
Mm-hmm.
not at all prepared to run face first into mental illness in my young adulthood and late teens. So it absolutely did shift the trajectory of my life forever. That's for sure. And I
Sure.
think I had to mourn that a lot and
Mm-hmm.
kind of, yeah, mourn that loss.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were given the right kind of support at that time, or did people not really know how to react?
No, I mean, yes and no, right?
Okay.
I feel like there's not enough support in the mental health industry at large for darn near anyone. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that. I feel like my parents did the best that they could and were as supportive as they possibly could. So that's a bonus, right? It could have gone a lot worse,
Mm-hmm.
especially because, you know, in the 80s, a lot of people thought, oh, mental illness is, you know, a weakness and people who take psych meds are weak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember as a child, my parents like making fun of this other family because their children took medicine for ADHD.
Oh.
And they were saying like, oh, you know, better living through chemistry. That's what they'd always say about that family. And so that kind of sat in my head. And
Mm-hmm.
as I developed mental illness, I was scared to have to take medicine for my brain, but I was also terrified of my mental illness. So I was ready to do it.
Mm-hmm. What was your initial reaction, I suppose, at that age when you started developing these symptoms? It must have been quite scary.
Well, you know, the symptoms that I experienced before diagnosis were sort of like I had these sort of episodic periods of psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I kind of wrote them off as just being my overactive imagination. I've always been really creative and had an overactive imagination. So I kind of wrote those off. But when it first started really happening to me, I still had those misconceptions about mental illness. So I thought I could just go to the doctor and get fixed, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, let's go to the doctor. Let's get this problem fixed. I got to go to work in the morning, you know, like what's the holdup?
Right.
So that was kind of my initial reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we all kind of fall into these traps. I think sometimes when it comes to mental health, of thinking that there's some way to like press a button or do a certain thing and then it's gone. You know, the
Yeah.
problem is gone and we're normal again. You know.
Exactly. I was fully sure that the problem would be gone. You know, there's treatment for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I
Right.
thought it would just magic itself away. I didn't realize that mental illness is something that you have to manage for a lifetime.
Right. And so how long do you think it took you to get a handle on how to manage it?
Oh man, a long time. It was definitely a gradual process, and the first 2 years were just an absolute total utter nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I gradually developed coping mechanisms. But honestly, things weren't even turning around until after 5 years. And I think that things didn't really feel like I was fully managing it until probably about 7, 8 years after diagnosis.
Wow. Okay. So that must have been a pretty turbulent 7 or 8 years then, that the first period.
Yeah, it sucked. Yeah. In my 20s were not fun.
So what were some of the biggest ways in which it impacted your life day to day once that diagnosis came in?
Well, I mean, I felt like I was just plunged in this whole other world.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it felt like this world of delusions and hallucinations was like I'm swimming in the ocean, right? But I can barely keep my face above the water, and there's no way I can ever stand on dry land again, right? I just
Mm-hmm.
got to keep swimming, keep swimming, keep swimming, and that's that's kind of that's kind of how it's been. I've just found ways to make that swim easier.
Right. I guess coping mechanisms are probably very important when you're going through something like that because, as you say, it's not something where you can ever have the expectation that it's going to magically disappear someday. So the coping mechanisms that you develop, kind of like the vast majority of other mental illnesses, they have to be something that is implementable consistently and continuously and can be sustainable. So what kind of coping mechanisms did you maybe I suppose what works and what doesn't, I suppose, in that regard, because I imagine you tried some stuff and it didn't work at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, there's some things that work like a little, but they're weird and quirky. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's some things that work overall. And I think the main number one coping skill that I have is getting enough healthy sleep. And anyone who's my friend in real life
Mm-hmm.
knows this, like if I throw a party, 10 o'clock, you guys are getting out of here. I got to go bed,
Mm-hmm.
like I am like the biggest square because everybody has to get out of my house at 10 o'clock. It's bedtime.
Right. Yeah.
And
Okay.
so, hey, Hoka Coca.
Welcome.
Um, yeah, I really, really, number one is sleep
Okay.
for my coping mechanism. Number two is just kind of generally keeping a low stress lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
because I, stress really impacts my ability to cope with my symptoms, even if my symptoms themselves don't really fluctuate a whole heck of a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely way more bothered by them if I'm stressed or haven't had enough sleep, and I'm less able to have a handle on them. Keep my face above the water, so to speak.
Yeah.
Those are the big main ones. When I was initially kind of getting sick, I had to come up with all these other bizarre coping mechanisms, like I'd put on headphones and blast music really loud just to kind of cope with the voices. And I'd like sometimes if I was having just these florid hallucinations, I'd use this sort of bright flashing light to like almost distract
I
my
see.
schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
It would start, I'd hallucinate surrounding this light instead of hallucinating, monsters or people. And it was just kind of an easier thing to cope with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd even do this, like, I feel like I was in a movie. I would like, when I had a cell phone camera, and this was like a flip phone, right? Like I would look through the screen
Mm-hmm.
at the thing that I wasn't sure was real. And I'd be like, okay, is it showing up on my phone screen,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And another thing that I kind of still do is I use pets and people as like my seeing eye reality helper animals. So
Okay.
like, if this table caught fire right now, I wouldn't leave the room unless you were like, oh my God, fire, right?
Yeah.
I'd just be like, okay, it's hallucination,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
I see. So I guess in that sense, being around other people is probably a pretty important part of recovery, right? Just in the sense
Yeah,
of
I
getting
think
support.
being around others is super important. And yeah, in fact, my cat is trying to eat my kid's sandwich that he left at the table. There we go.
I know that
Anyway,
feeling. I have to
yeah,
have this door shut because otherwise I'd get two cats in here every time I'm doing this thing, and no one would be paying attention to me at that point, I feel like.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah, so I think being around other humans is especially important.
yeah. So do you have you kind of built a support network for yourself over the years of specific people that help you with this stuff?
Definitely. I think I'm really lucky in that I did run into enough awesome doctors and stuff that I was able to sort of, in general, trust medical science instead of becoming insanely distrustful. Just because, there's a lot of people out there in the mental health industry who aren't so great, but I don't want to focus on them. I want to focus on the doctors who really gave me faith and trust in the system. And so I had a doctor who actually later diagnosed my cancer. And this doctor was so trustworthy that I knew I could call her if I needed anything. And she became my real life friend. So I even had her cell number, and I even had to like call her once, like at home, and be like, I need my meds refilled like now, So I think having the medical supports, a therapist that was trustworthy and a doctor who is trustworthy were really important, trusting those professionals, because even though it'd be nice to lean on friends and family, they also, need a break from caregiving too. And overwhelming them became a problem in and of itself.
Right. I think that's a big concern for anybody. I think we all have this desire to not want to be a burden on people. And in some ways it can be sometimes easier when you know that the person who's taking care of you, that's their job, and exactly. and they're being paid to do that, and they're doing it because it's an exchange of something, as opposed to someone is doing something out of the kindness of their heart to take care of you, and you now feel like you're this huge burden on them, and they can't go and enjoy their life and do what they want to do because they're taking care of you. That there's a big difference there, I think.
Yep.
So Hoka Coca says, I read well-being and positivity motivational groups or pages. Yeah, great idea. I think anything that lifts you up in some way, anything that provides a mood boost can be super important and super valuable for well-being. And I think when it comes to the sort of aspects of mental health that are significantly important, or the aspects that make the biggest difference day to day, finding some kind of pattern, finding some kind of habit that you can get into that is not harmful or addictive or something like that, but that can just provide you that lift, whether it's in an actual kind of dopamine sense or in a general mood sense. I think that can be super powerful. So it's a good suggestion, Coca. Monobrow says, hey Monobrow, welcome back. I think we had him or her in the chat previously, so welcome. So I think something interesting you kind of touched on there is the role of caretakers, or the role of the people who are taking care of you during this experience, whether it's doctors, family members, things like that. Did you find that when it came to your illness and your diagnosis, did you find the people around you were largely sort of receptive to the idea that this was something that was going to take a long time and that you were going to need care and things like this? Or was there that sense of maybe people don't understand it, people are a bit sort of like unsure about how to help you?
Well, I think that there's a lot of defining points in life where the real people in your life stay and the fake people leave. And this was one of those moments.
Right.
So a lot of people from my life vanished, and I was really surprised by it because I'd never had anything like that happen. Of course, now, at age 39, I've had that happen like 3 times now. So, so I think it's a thing that happens to everyone. It's one of those defining moments. And this was my first. And so I think I was surprised at how many people just vanished. And the ones who stayed were, they didn't know what to expect. My parents had no experience with mental illness whatsoever. My friends had experience with, ADHD. It was the same family my parents made fun of, by the way. They grew up to be amazing people who were super supportive. And so they didn't have any experience with psychosis. And I think what was most upsetting for my parents, especially, is that they didn't know what was signs of my mental illness and what was signs from the medications I was taking, because I was experiencing pretty severe side effects to the antipsychotics that they were giving me, and nobody knew. We didn't have experience. We didn't know if this was like meds or the illness.
Right. So how did you go about separating those things? How did you go about establishing which meds were working for you and which weren't, and breaking down that process?
I feel like that's a lifelong process too, to be
Hmm.
honest. I think I'm never going to give up on applying for studies every time there's a new antipsychotic out, because there's nothing good out there for antipsychotics. I don't want to, I know there's a lot that work for many people, but I think they would be the first to admit, they're not the best things, and it would be great if we had something better. So, I mean, the process was I really just trusted the doctors. I was, like I said, I was scared of taking brain meds, but I was even more scared of my mental illness. So the first drug that they gave me, I assumed was the only one, and it was Haldol. And they gave me just so much Haldol, like the biggest dose possible. So I experienced a lot of side effects from that. And my doctors actually took me off of it. I remember the doctor made me bring in the bottle, and she threw it in her trash can. She was like, don't take any more. Do not, because she knew I'd keep taking more because I was terrified of my illness. And so then the next one I was on, gosh, this could take all day. Like, honestly, I just rotated through like Risperdal and Abilify and let's see, Celexa was like the depression drug they gave me at first, which actually increased hallucinations. You'd think they would like not do that.
I guess
And
the idea is they're supposed to not do that, right? I think that's probably the worst case scenario, that it gets worse, right?
here's a good question from Smithy. How
Oh
do
yeah.
antipsychotics work? The scary thing about this is nobody knows. Nobody knows. People think that it's dopamine antagonists. So the idea is that schizophrenics are producing tons of dopamine. It's like the opposite of Parkinson's. So in Parkinson's disease, they have a lack of dopamine. In schizophrenics, there's tons of dopamine. So we believe, like the scientists believe, that they're interacting with the dopamine, but nobody knows for sure how antipsychotics work. And the fact is, they don't like just turn off symptoms. It's not like that. So I hope there are better ones out soon.
Yeah, I think we all do. I think we're all we're in a place now socially where we all sort of recognize that everybody being highly medicated at various times for various things is not the way that we want society to be. It's not the way that we want people to be living, because of side effects and because of how it sort of shackles us to this constant habit of putting more things into our bodies that aren't naturally supposed to be there. But I feel like we don't have a roadmap as to how we get away from this. We don't have a roadmap as a society as to how we get to the point where the people who are taking these things and experiencing positives aren't, taken away from that.
Yeah.
But then also how do we get to a point where people who where we kind of understand that gray area as to maybe medication can help somebody, maybe it won't, maybe it could make things worse, maybe it could put them on a pathway that they wouldn't want to be on long term. Maybe there are other things that can help too. There's a million different fields and areas sort of associated with this whole thing, and I can only imagine, as someone with the symptoms that you have, it must have probably been quite difficult, I think, at a certain point to start separating out, what meds do I need and what do I not need? What habits do I need and what do I not need? And things like that. Is it fair to say?
Yeah, because my schizophrenia has been remarkably treatment resistant, and I think in the beginning, especially, I assumed that meds would fix it, would turn it off,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was what I was after, and so I was really the one asking the doctors, like, can you increase my meds? Like, what's going on? They're not turning this off, right? So I had like the max dose of Haldol and the max dose of Risperdal, like the big horse pills that, and just everything, and I think that was kind of to my detriment in the beginning, because now I still take an antipsychotic, but I'm not like cramming down the most of it that I possibly can, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking some in order to manage the symptoms, but I know that it's not going to turn them off, so I'm not just trying to overdo it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that all any of us can really do is the best that we can with the information that we have, with the access that we have, with the availability of healthcare services that we have, and all sorts of things like that. So I think from what I remember you mentioning previously, you've lived in both the US and Canada, right? Is that right? Okay. So how have you found the differences in terms of how your illness has been treated between those two healthcare systems?
Oh, it's wild, man. The way my doctor when my records got ported up, the way my doctors here in Canada put it, in the States, your medical records are all arranged around billing,
Yes,
right?
right.
So all of my records didn't make any sense to the Canadians. My cancer records, my mental health records, they couldn't make heads or tails of it because it was all mixed up. So I basically had to like go in and tell my life story for each of my doctors to make sure that they got everything in order and they got all the important information. The mental health care in the States was pretty scary.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not perfect here in Canada, believe you me. Like there's a lot that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm definitely experiencing a lot better mental health care in Canada overall. And I think that my life has benefited as a result.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that, certainly speaking personally as someone coming from the UK, the system in the UK is not perfect, but the system in the US is actively designed to make things worse for people. And
yeah, exactly.
I do not understand why the US system still has people advocating it. I can only assume that the people who advocate for this system are the people who haven't seen other systems and understand that it can work better.
I think also it's like part of the culture so much that you don't realize how crazy it is when you're in it. Because even I didn't realize, like I knew it sucked and I knew it was crazy and I knew Canada would be better. But like now that I've been back here in Canada for a few years, I'm just like, whoa, I can't even imagine, like nobody around me believes how bad it was. Like if I tell people, yeah, I knew 20-year-old people who were like, oh yeah, I have like stroke symptoms, but I'm not going to go in because I can't afford another emergency room visit. You know, like the amount of people just sitting on horrible medical problems because they can't afford to go in is astounding.
Yeah.
It's
And absolutely. And honestly, like for me personally, like I'm living here in the US because my wife is American. If I could move to Canada, if we could move to Canada, I'd be on the first train to Canada or whatever, like because I mentioned already, I think before we got on air, Vancouver is one of my favorite cities on the planet, but Canada is one of my favorite countries on the planet. And I feel like you guys do a lot right when it comes to healthcare. So I'm certainly jealous, but I think a lot of Americans probably are right now. So, we won't touch that subject in too much detail because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that
we could go on all day about that. We could go on
for, yeah, exactly. Right. But Ramen Not the Noodle has a question in the chat. What do you think is keeping mental health from being made a priority? Interesting question.
I think that's a good question, and that would be answered separately for each of these countries. I think that if you look at the attitudes, the societal attitudes, for example, US versus Canada on addiction. Addiction is a huge mental health issue. I've never had to struggle with it, but I was with somebody who struggled with addiction, and it was very difficult for me. It's a family illness when somebody has an addiction, right? So if you look in the States and in Canada of how we view people who are suffering from addiction, it's very different. Even though in Canada, there's still kind of this taboo against people who are homeless and struggling with addiction. People understand that it's a health issue. Like it's automatic in Canada that it's a health issue and that we need to address it through healthcare and community supports. Whereas in the States, that's still up for debate, right? Like, is it a health issue or do they need to just knock it off and we need to put them in jail, right? Like there's people debating this still.
Yeah, it's wild. There are things that happen in the US that don't happen elsewhere, and we as residents of the US, as an immigrant to the US, I'm constantly dealing with that. But I think that in terms of the help that you have been given, in terms of the way that things have clearly improved for you in Canada, what's made the biggest difference, do you think?
Honestly, another quirky thing, there's this amazing organization in Canada called Stand Up for Mental Health.
Okay.
And what it is it's a program run by a licensed counselor guy, and they teach how to write stand-up comedy to anyone with a mental health problem. And then you meet once a week or twice a week with the group, and you check in with everyone, and so it's a great place to sort of make friends and to sort of be able to over time open up and be vulnerable about things. And you learn to sort of make comedy out of the problems that you have, which is, it sounds weird, and I can't believe that it's the most amazing and helpful mental health care I've ever received, but it totally is. And it's really changed my life, and I love it. I love it so much. And it's great for holding me accountable to others to, show up weekly and be monitored in a sense, but in a way that's fun.
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to put on your. I forgot to mention on your bio, comic. You're involved in comedy now. So is that an experience that, for a lot of people that's like a terrifying thought, to be doing stand up, or to be in some kind of performative setting like that. Was that a scary thing to get into, even with it being used as a mental health sort of thing?
I think so. It was scary at first, but I think the fear and what you're like, I thought I wouldn't have anything. I would have no way to make this funny, right? Like I'm like, how can we make all these horrible things in life funny? And indeed, for the first 6 months to a year, I was writing like angry jokes, like I was just kind of getting out my feelings in a way that wasn't funny. But I think that was good. That was part of the process. We worked on these things, these concepts, and we shopped them and we turned them over until they started being funny and relatable. And I think that was really helpful. And I think I kind of look at everything that way now, where I'm like, well, at least this could be funny.
That's good, right? I mean, it adds a sense of being able to get something positive out of something that, in the moment it might not be a positive experience, but you can translate it into something that can be relatable for other people, and be maybe neutralize the impact of whatever discomfort.
Yeah, I was about to say it neutralized the bitterness I had about a lot of things. I came with a lot of really bitter feelings. And now when I think back to those feelings, they're not mine anymore, right? I was able to process them and transform them through comedy.
Oh, yeah, a couple of people saying my mic is low. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to make sure I wasn't getting any reverb on my end, but it should be back to normal now. Yeah, I mean, I think that people being able to have tools that they can use to transform what they're going through into something positive, that for me is a very powerful. Yeah, Kat says all good now. Okay, cool. I turned it back up. That to me is a really powerful thing that for any mental health issue, whether it's depression, anxiety, all kinds of other stuff, if people are going through something where they're struggling, if they're having an experience that is, a detriment to them in some way, it's decreasing the quality of life that they're experiencing, then taking that and making it something they can share with other people. Comedy is one way of doing that, but what I'm doing is another way. Being able to put my story out there to a degree and connect with other people, that's an important thing too. So for anybody out there that I think might be listening to this and is going through things like this, I can certainly vouch for how powerful it is to just simply be able to put yourself out there and sort of express what you're going through with other people, and recognize that there are other people who've gone through the same thing. So I'm sure that process of connecting with other people on the same level, who are going through things that you've been through, I'm sure that was powerful for you too.
Yeah, for sure. And Smithy was asking, do you think mental health treatments will move towards these kind of holistic treatments rather than medications? Do we go too far down the medical road? And I was saying, I think meds are still an important piece of the puzzle. I mean, a lot of this is a brain chemistry problem, right? And so there's no way to kind of make my chemistry fix itself through just like awesome stuff that I do in life. But yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be, in general, for approaching any problem in life, a holistic, at least analysis of how it's impacting your life and how you can ease those impacts.
Yeah, I think one thing that we had Dr. Rob Tarswell on the show with our first episode, and one thing that he pointed out that was really, really valuable, I think, is he said that mental health is now, in today's environment, it's being analyzed through basically three perspectives, a sort of tripartite perspective where you have the biological and the chemical, where you talk about meds and you talk about like what's going on in this person's body that should not be going on. And then you have the psychological, which is the stuff that we only really understand through just analyzing the way someone's thinking and the way someone's feeling. And then you have the sociological, and you have this overarching level where there are social trends and commonalities in our society that are engineering a greater instance of mental health issues because they're connecting with these other biological and psychological influences in ways that are dangerous to us, So
yeah.
yeah,
I was going to say something related to schizophrenia there, which is that it's kind of unique in that insight-oriented psychotherapy is actually not recommended and can actually be harmful because schizophrenics struggle with insight. Insight is hard, and insight-oriented psychotherapy can be useless at best and dangerous at worst. So, cognitive behavioral therapy has shown to be more benefits, and that's what I work on. But I think that that's one reason why the comedy is so important to me, because I can't have that insight-based psychotherapy that's so helpful for people suffering from other disorders.
Right, I see. Yeah, that certainly I think that's a factor that's kind of overlooked for a lot of people. Therapy is something that there are many forms of it, and there are many forms of it that can be very useful depending on what a person's going through. But at the same time, there are certain specific conditions like yours where a certain kind of therapy can make it worse. A certain going down the wrong route can make it worse. And I think that's that's one of the tricky parts about mental health as a whole. You're always stuck in this area where you want to try to make things better, but some stuff you do that you try, if it doesn't work, it might make it worse. So I'm curious if you have any way of if you're going to incorporate something new or try something new to tackle some symptoms, what's the process that you go through to evaluate, is it worth trying this or might it make things worse?
I'm probably the worst person to ask for that because I'm really impulsive. So
Okay.
I'm just like, if I see something that might help, I'm like, let's go, let's do this.
So you
try it.
just do it, and if there's bad
Do it,
consequences,
and then if it doesn't work, I have
Okay.
to run screaming away from it. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, you have to do a push-up.
Oh, I have to do a push-up. Someone activated the Twitch thing. All right,
Yeah.
I'll do that. I'm not gonna do a push-up in the middle of an interview.
I
I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that later. I promise to whoever that is. When I start the stream that's after the interview, when I start playing The Last of Us, which I'm gonna do after this, I promise I will do a push-up at the start of that stream. But I don't want I don't want these videos to be up on YouTube in perpetuity with me doing push-ups in the background, because that's not what I want the viewers to have to deal with. The push-ups are for Twitch. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think the perspective that we're sort of arriving at, I think, with mental health is that, we understand that there's all these different things that can help, right? And there's all these different things that we might try that might end up making things better, might end up making things worse. But the hardest part, I think, for a lot of people is to get to a point where they understand that there are things that they can do that make it better, right? Because sometimes we fall into traps of thinking, this is how it is, it's not going to get better, and feeling like there's not much that you can do. I see we got a lot of chat coming in. I'm gonna come back to that in just a second. I want to read that comment from Barbara. Dr. Alex doesn't really know me, but she said some kind words to me. Oh, okay. Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm glad that Barbara was able to get a lot of positive insight. That's awesome. So going back to what I was saying there, I think is it's very easy with mental health to fall into a trap of feeling like we can't do anything, or feeling like there's nothing that we can do. So how have you over the years, how have you kind of avoided falling into that trap of feeling very helpless about what you're going through?
Well, I think that I fell into it for a very long time, and I
Okay.
returned to it a lot.
Hmm.
I remember the first time I started feeling like, okay, I've got some coping skills, I can function in the world again. And I got a job in mental health, you know, because like you, I was feeling really passionate about it. I was like, I want to help people too who
Hmm.
are going through this experience. And I started working in a halfway home for the mentally ill. There were 16 residents and they were awesome. And I loved them and they loved me. And it was so great. Like, I made this whole curriculum on life skills, and we would do these lessons on like how to write a check and stuff. Cause a lot of these people had been in an institution for like 10 or 20 years. And it was so wonderful. And then my boss found out that I have schizophrenia
Hmm.
and told me, we can't have you working with your peers, and just stopped scheduling me. You know,
Wow.
technically my job was on call, even though I was working 40 hours a week. You know, so I stopped getting scheduled, and that really broke me for a while. My confidence was shaken, and I should have pursued legal action. If it was me today, yeah, I would have lawyered up immediately. But
Hmm.
at the time, I didn't, because I thought, they're right. You know, what am I doing? I'm a schizo trying to do stuff. Nah. And so I just like stopped doing stuff for a while. And there was a lot of periods in my life where that happened.
Oh, well, yeah. I think that anytime you're going through something where you're prevented from doing your job, you know, that's a huge impact to deal with. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Um, oh, we had a question from Final Table Boy. How do you realize if an experience is a hallucination or not?
Yeah, I
Interesting.
love that Hoka Coca is saying the same thing that I do, which is what I call logic filters. So, like I said earlier, part of it's based on how others in the room or are reacting. That's why I hate being alone with my own brain. That really sucks.
Hmm.
Like if this table caught fire and then nobody else in the room noticed or said anything, I would just kind of like steel myself and ignore it and try and act really normal. And if somebody walked in the room who I know is in the house, I would probably try to interact with them. But if like somebody walked in and it didn't look like a person who should live here, I would probably just ignore it and not react to it. But I do mess up, you know, I do
Hmm.
make mistakes, and that's why I can't really have one of those normal 9 to 5 jobs, because I do act funny sometimes.
Well, certainly, I think these days there are an increasingly small number of people who actually do work a 9 to 5 job, as you mentioned, and everybody these days is filling their time with all kinds of different endeavors and enterprises. I'm certainly one of them, you know. So I am glad that we live in a world now where you have the ability to manage your illness while also being able to do things that allow you to be part of society and make a living and things like that. That's one thing to be thankful for, I suppose. So I'm curious, actually, something that we haven't really touched upon yet that you kind of, I think you mentioned it earlier, is your cancer diagnosis, which came, I think you mentioned it was 2015, was it?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay. So as someone already going through mental illness, how, what was the experience like of getting that diagnosis initially? Because that had to have been just like piling on top of what you were already dealing with, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was worried about how the stress of
Mm-hmm.
having a potentially fatal disease, you know, it was very advanced. I had stage 3C breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I had about a 25% chance that the treatments wouldn't work and I wouldn't live
Wow.
for 2 years. I was definitely worried about how that would impact my mental health. And
Mm-hmm.
luckily, like I said, I have that really trustworthy doctor, the same doctor who trusted me about my mental illness and was so available to me. She was the one who discovered my cancer. And so she was there for me throughout. And honestly, I did not suffer uh, in my ability to cope with my mental illness as much as I thought I would with the
Okay.
stress of cancer, especially considering that I had like 5 months where I just didn't sleep. I was like an insomniac, but you know, I was also pretty ill. So I think that I was really lucky that I didn't have an inability to cope. I think if this had happened at the same time in the early years of my diagnosis, I don't think I would have survived. I don't think I would have been able to, go to treatments and take my medicines and do all the things that you need to do to survive cancer.
Wow. Yeah. I think that certainly, obviously, we're all very grateful that you did pull through. So congratulations on having the strength to fight that whole battle, because it's got to be hard, and it's got to be something.
Well, people stronger than me have died.
Yeah, and I don't want to.
No, I know. I'm touchy about that.
I immediately regret using the word strength, because
yeah.
I completely get where you're coming from. I don't want to phrase it in that way, because the idea that people have lost a battle when they don't survive is, that's not the way we want to frame it. And I don't want to use that word. But how do you talk about that? Like, because that's what I wasn't sure of. Like, what is the word that you would use to talk about that experience?
Well, we talk about being survivors,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about being survivors, even if we have, even people who have stage 4 breast cancer, and they're not going to survive their cancer. They're still survivors while they're alive. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I bristle at the word strength, because I know I'm strong. Definitely. I'm definitely a strong person, but I have a lot of survivor's guilt. Because I do have friends who were much stronger than me by like 1,000-fold, and they have 3 kids and a husband, and succumb to the disease. So it sucks, and we have to talk about our ability to cope and our ability to survive. But yeah, cancer people are their own little special club, and we can joke among ourselves about those things, but the rest of the world just has to be there and be supportive for whatever the person is going through, which might be really cheerful and might be really sad.
Sure. Yeah. Do you feel like any of the coping mechanisms that you developed to handle your mental illness also helped when you got your cancer diagnosis?
Definitely.
Okay.
I think that my strength as a person was forged by my schizophrenia. It wasn't forged by my cancer. Mm-hmm. I was already strong enough to deal with a lot of horrific things happening to me, because I had non-real horrific things happening to me, right? Like a lot of my hallucinations are really scary. Mm-hmm. And I've learned to sort of steel myself against really scary experiences. And at least from a medical perspective. And so I think that really helped. And of course, just the regular, like you said, holistic, like Chat said, holistic stuff, like having meditation already as a tool in my tool belt was really important, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about meditation, actually, because it's something that I do very, very regularly. I do it every day. And it's been a huge sort of addition to my life, I think, over the time period that I've been on this kind of journey of discovering it, I guess. What do you think that meditation adds to your life in general?
I think that meditation is like a Swiss Army knife, because there's just so many different forms of meditation, and there's so many contexts that you can use it in. And, I taught meditation to my cancer support group. I would open with a meditation and close with meditation. And I'd teach different styles, because different styles work for different contexts and different people, right? So I think it's so important, for sure, like you say. And I think that it's really important for dealing with pain, either physical or emotional.
Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly second that. There's so much value in being able to sort of disconnect the part of your brain that's constantly, just running in the background and wanting to engage with different things, and I can expect that I know there are people for who meditation has not been effective. My wife is one. She's in the chat. She's had negative experiences with meditation because it's a PTSD trigger for her. When she meditates, flashbacks and things come in that make it easier for her to meditate in a way that's more active. So even just something as simple as doing something physical, like playing a simple video game or something like that. For my wife, that can be more of a meditative activity that helps. But I think for anybody, you need something that's going to allow your brain to disconnect and just kind of settle
Yeah.
and allow the thoughts to just kind of be where they are without having to be constantly processed in this kind of way.
Yeah, Cat likes walks. I love
Hmm.
going for a run. That's like a really good, it's a socially acceptable thing to do when you're really angry, is just like, I'm gonna go for a run. And then you let your mind go through all those angry things. And then by the time you come back, you're not mad anymore. And I really love that.
Yeah, I think that's that's a great suggestion. Any kind of exercise or things like that. It certainly the benefits of exercise are huge, and I think that there's so many different kinds of exercise that there's going to be one for everybody. It's hard not to be able to find one. So going back a little bit, and going back to something you mentioned earlier, you've touched on the idea right now. Oh, sorry, you've touched on the idea already that you're a parent as well as being a mental illness advocate and all sorts of things like that. How do you think that your experiences with mental illness have influenced the way that you approach parenting?
Well, for one thing, I have to be careful and have supports. I think that started when I became pregnant. And I remember people weren't actually super excited that I'd gotten pregnant, right? They were more worried,
Mm-hmm.
My mom was like, "Are you gonna keep it?" And I'm like, "I'm married. I wanted this. Yes, of
Mm-hmm.
course." And my best friend was like, "What about your schizophrenia? And here's this article about how schizophrenic moms don't give the right facial expressions to their babies." And I'm like, "Oh, how is this going to work out?" So I talked to my doctor, and I was also concerned about postpartum psychosis, which is a big deal. For those of you who don't know, a lot of women who are totally neurotypical, totally normal ladies, when they give birth, they experience a psychotic break, often for the first time in their lives, and it can be really dangerous to them and to their kids. So I was really scared that pregnancy and the hormones associated would just be horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And I was scared of, taking my mental health meds during pregnancy because nobody studied these things, right? My doctor put it this way. She was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Okay, they haven't studied these meds because they can't just like grab a bunch of pregnant women and be like, here, test these meds," right?
Right.
So, but you know, being alive and pregnant is better than being dead and pregnant. So if there's a psych med that you need to take, take it, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. I mean that's I suppose it's a nice simple way of putting it, I guess, right?
Exactly. That's how she told me. So she
Mm-hmm.
was like, if you need it, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And and then when I came up to my due date, I was really scared I would just have massive postpartum psychosis. And so I told my doctor, "Okay, every third day, can you give me a quick 5-minute phone call to make sure everything's okay?" And then I told my therapist, "Okay, every third day, can you give me a phone call?" And then I told my doula, "Okay, every
Mm-hmm.
third day." So basically, once a day, these people
Yeah.
were calling me and checking in, and talking to my ex-husband and making sure that everything was copacetic. And I had no problems
Okay.
with that. So
That's
I
great.
was really lucky. So that was really my first thing. But I'm extra careful as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
If I have some problems, I immediately get help because I
Mm-hmm.
know that I gotta do it for my kids.
Yeah. Are your kids at an age yet where they kind of understand your illness, or are they still quite young?
Yeah, that actually it's so funny. I'm very open about my mental illness because people with schizophrenia often aren't. I mean, we're 1% of the population. If you're in a big box store with 100 people, one of them is schizophrenic.
Wow, I
And
didn't
yet
realize
we
that.
don't know this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because people are really private about it. So my kids, they wear a purple for the National Day of Schizophrenia. I remember my daughter said, "I told my teacher that you were schizophrenic, and then she told me to tell another teacher." And I was like, interesting, because I was head of the parent group there. And
Mm-hmm.
so they were probably learning for the first time and going, "Oh, that probably explains a lot." So, yeah, my kids are well aware of it, and I try and talk to them about it because, they each have a percent chance, possibly as high as 25%, of developing it in their
Mm-hmm.
late teens or early 20s. And I want them to know that it's something that can be managed.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I'm also working on is I developed kind of one of those unhealthy coping mechanisms. And that is when I act strange, I found that one of the really effective ways to make people leave you alone is that you get kind of angry at them. Like, so if let's say we're in a room together and I see a hallucination enter the room and I make a mistake and I say, hey, what's up? You know, and you go, who are you talking to? I'd probably be like, nobody. What? Like, what are, like, I was just saying, hey, you know, like, what's your problem? Right. And if you're a little defensive, they will immediately drop it. Right. And it'll go away from their brains because they felt uncomfortable in that moment. They will not suspect a thing. So I had to stop this coping mechanism with my kids, right? Because it's become automatic. And so if I make a mistake in front of my kids and then I'm like, what? And then I'm like, no. Mom was seeing something. It was not real. It's her brain problem, right? So, wow. It's improving me, really.
I imagine that the experience of trying to understand the version of reality that your kids are seeing versus the version that you're seeing, is that a stressful one? Is it kind of hard to sort of understand that they are inherently seeing the world differently to you?
I think I've kind of come to terms with that. Just, in the beginning of this stream, I said that when I first got diagnosed, it felt like I was suddenly like madness is the ocean and I'm swimming in the ocean and I can never get on land again where everyone else is standing. Occasionally they get their ankles wet, but I'm in here swimming, keeping my face above water. And I felt like so different and so othered from everyone. And I think I got over that basically by now. So I understand that my kids have this whole different world and this whole different thing and all of these opportunities available to them that I don't have. And I'm happy about that. But I no longer need to be understood. I just need to be tolerated.
I see. Yeah. Coca has a lot of Hoka Coca has a lot of interesting points in the chat over the years of schizophrenia. If I ever feel uncomfortable, I learn to confront it and ask questions, e.g., are you guys talking about me? Interesting. Yeah. So is that something I see you nodding there? Like, is that like an important thing you think?
Yeah, I'm just remembering for a while I had this like weird delusion and hallucination kind of combined, where if somebody was wearing a patterned shirt, like the pattern would rearrange itself to like say what they were thinking about me.
Oh, wow.
And that was like really annoying to me because it was really difficult to ignore. And it was like that I would have to just kind of break in the conversation and be like, hey, I'm just getting this sense that you're thinking this, like, is this true? And it is good, it is good to check in with people, and that's good for everyone. Even neurotypical people should be asking people and making sure. Yeah.
Oh, so we have a comment on YouTube. Some people watching on YouTube, I guess, which is great. RT'd for awareness. Hey Matt. Hey 08 Grinder. Thank you for the YouTube attention. Normally most people just watch on Twitch, and I just stream it to YouTube so that it auto records to YouTube and I have it there for later. But it looks like we got some people watching on YouTube. That's great. So I think one thing that has kind of been, we sort of covered it a little bit in terms of the discussion about the difference in health systems and things like that. But I'm curious, as a society in general, do you think that we're currently doing enough to cater to people with illnesses like yourselves, or are there some big holes that you're seeing?
No. And one thing that I think is a problem in the mental health industry at large, and this is probably for all countries, is that, we probably all know that the vast majority of mental health workers have a personal connection with mental illness, right? Either they themselves suffer from mental illness or they have a close family member that really inspired them to take that journey. And what I discovered is that since schizophrenia is relatively rare as a mental illness compared to depression and anxiety, a lot of the mental health providers are very apathetic towards schizophrenics in particular, because it's not their bag. It's not their thing that they got into this to be passionate about. They're kind of off put by the whole idea, and it's incurable, right? So like, what are you going to do? Right. So I think that that's a big problem, and I'm not sure how it can be really addressed except through continued awareness and working to end the stigma, just like with every other mental illness needs that work done.
I see. Yeah. I think that, it's well said in that, for the most part, we as individuals, we tend to take an interest in the things that relate to us specifically. And I think that when someone has an experience that they've gone through that, we can empathize, but we can't sympathize. There is a line there between those two things where empathy can get you a long way, but sympathy is a lot of the time just understanding that someone's going through something you went through. It can often be more powerful. And so I'm curious, when it comes to people who don't suffer from schizophrenia, what do you think everybody in that portion of the population can do to try to make things easier on people around them who may suffer or who may be going through what you're going through?
Yeah, I think that if it's a stranger, like, I'm not scared of those people yelling on the street who are homeless anymore, right? That could easily be me. And I think if it's a stranger, just eye contact and a smile goes a long way towards humanizing somebody who's been actively, aggressively ignored by everyone else, right? And if it's a friend or something, just treat them like you would anyone else, anyone who had any other non-catching but severe illness, like, hey, I see you're struggling. Do you want to lay down for a bit? Do you want a cup of tea, while I take care of this? Like, just those kind of things, like you would do, just those humanizing acts of kindness really help.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that that does go a long way, as Hoka points out, just by being caring, just by being giving confirmations. Yeah, I think that, those kind of basic kindnesses, they should be standard for everybody, right? They should be the kind of thing that we're willing to extend to everybody. But I think especially, if we want to create an environment in society that is hospitable for people who suffer from any kind of mental illness, whatever it is, I think that kind of baseline kindness and attention is super important. Now, when
I think back to those early years that were just total hell, it's those moments of kindness that I remember, like when I got disability pay and the social worker gave me a real caring hug. Like, I remember that moment, right? And government worker on the phone who cried happy tears with me when I got my first job, like, those moments I remember because it's just tiny acts of human kindness and realizing that I'm a person, right? Because people are scared,
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of, the expression of that kind of kindness towards each other really is, it goes such a long way. And I think people underestimate how far it can go, Now, one other thing that you're involved in that we haven't covered a lot yet, but you can see it in your background there. You're very involved in poker. You mentioned already you're streaming for Run It Once, and you're very passionate about poker. So I'm curious about the role that poker plays as a sort of almost a mental health management tool. In that you said you're very passionate about it. Diving into poker as an sort of not an exercise, but as a pastime, I suppose, can be a great sort of diversion for many people because they get to really truly focus on what they're doing, focus heavily on making the decisions, all sorts of things like that. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, how you got into poker, but also how you've sort of used poker to help make your life better, I suppose.
Well, it's funny because I discovered poker in 2017 when I played my very first hand, and it was right after 3 years that really sucked in my life. Like I said, I've had these ups and down periods, and it was after a down period. And that was because in those 3 years, I had been through a really nasty car accident. I had gotten cancer, and then my ex-husband, he had run off on me with my best friend. It was kind of like a country song. I even lost my dog, like it was all that, So I was really struggling to understand life's variance, and I discovered poker, and it really fosters a stoic philosophy. And by stoicism, I mean like the understanding that your internal condition does not need to rely on external events surrounding you.
Yeah.
And the idea that there's just another hand coming down the road, right? And so I think that really helped me. It pulled me out of that funk from those few years that were a super bummer. And ever since then, I've been really happy, and poker makes me happier.
So how do you? That's great to hear, by the way. It's always nice to hear about people who are able to use poker as a tool for positive personal development. You know, I think that for me, it was very important for just sort of giving me something to focus my energy on, that where I could see consistent improvement. You know, and I think that prior to discovering poker, I had never really had anything that I had spent my time on that where I felt like I could focus on it and see my own development taking place in the way that I did with poker.
It's also really absorbing, which is helpful
Yeah.
when you want to get away from your own brain, is just thinking about the decision at the table and nothing else in the world. And I love that.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be my next question. I'm curious about how, do you ever feel like your illness intrudes on you while you're playing? Do you ever experience anything does poker trigger anything sometimes, or in that regard, or is it not that?
I think that I definitely experience my illness while I'm playing, and that's natural because I experience it in everyday life. So I think I don't experience it any more than usual. I kind of am curious that if I move up in stakes to where it's like actually stressful, if I start having like a problem and have to drop down in stakes due to mental health reasons, but I haven't been there yet. I'm still in the cheeseburger stakes, so it's okay.
Good. Cheeseburger stakes are always fun. That's the fun part of the journey for sure. So tell us a bit about Poker Power, the initiative that you're involved with, that we can see the logo for it behind you right there.
Yeah.
Nope. That way.
Yeah. So, Poker Power is really cool. It was an organization. It's an organization for women, and they teach women and girls how to play poker as a means of kind of teaching them self-confidence, risk assessment, and strategic thinking, right?
Awesome.
And I saw their website and I was like, that's so cool, because before the pandemic, that's basically what I was doing in my neighborhood, is I was snagging local moms from my kids' school and being like, hey, you want to learn poker? And then dragging them to my house and like giving them hand rankings and being like, let's play and be super friends. And so that's what I was doing already. And so when I reached out to Poker Power, I was like, how do I get involved? And they were like, well, you could teach for us and we'll even give you money for teaching. And I was like, what? So it's pretty cool. It's like the closest thing to an actual job I've had in a long time, and I'm really happy with it. And it's really fulfilling. Of course, it's all online right now because of the pandemic, so it's super low stress and cool. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm having a fun time teaching just random ladies who want to learn how to play poker, who go to the website.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that that sounds like a wholly positive thing to be involved in as well. I think that it's nice to see that you've been able to not only add poker into your life as something that really helps you and is really positive, but also that can help other people too. So you're doing something.
And
really
I have a master's degree in teaching, and so I feel like, hey, I can actually use it again. I never thought I would.
Right. That teaching qualification comes in handy, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Like I obviously don't have a master's in teaching, but I've done a bunch of teaching in the past, and until I became a poker coach, I never thought I'd use it again, so it's nice that it comes in handy. So let's talk a little bit more about, not more, but let's talk a little bit about the book that you have written. Your book is titled Getting Through It, and it's all about trauma recovery. So tell us a little bit about the writing process and where that idea came from.
Sure. Well, the writing process is I write pretty prolifically. I've written over 24 published books. So wow. I started doing that in 2009, which is, when I was having a good year, and I've kept doing it. So it turns out to be a thing that I can keep doing, which is surprising. A lot of the things that I do, I don't keep doing because of my mental illness. So writing good things.
Mm-hmm.
So I typically write a book in like 2 or 3 months, and then it takes forever to get published because publishers are slow.
Uh-huh.
And I mostly write books for a publisher called Llewellyn Worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the world's largest publisher of like body, mind, spirit books.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do a lot of meditation and mindfulness books.
Sure.
And so after my cancer experience and the divorce and all the other stuff, my editor came to me and she was like, hey, it would be really cool if you wrote a book about how to sort of get through trauma and adversity while keeping your positive thinking intact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. I wrote that book, and it went through a lot of iterations because at first it was really more like a memoir, kind of like blah, like therapeutic process for me. And
Yeah.
then my editor was like, well, that's great. It was probably really fun, but we need to make this into something good for people, right?
Right.
and, so, and so I heavily revised it and tried to focus more on the reader and how I could help them, kind of shift into that mindset while going through any kind of trauma type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've come up with something that's really good, and it's called Getting Through It, and it releases December 8th, but you can like pre-order it online already. I don't sell the books myself, so you can buy it from wherever you want, like support your local bookstores or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm actually really happy with how it turned out in the end, with all the help and the hammering my editors did. I really think it could help a lot of people who are going through problems just because of this pandemic, and experiencing crises in a way that they haven't before. So it's like oddly good timing considering that I wrote that book, like in 2019 when things weren't bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that it's funny how I think a lot of us, obviously, none of us saw this coming in 2020. None of us saw the whole chaotic experience of the pandemic coming. But I think that I'm always kind of heartened when I can hear stories from people who've been able to turn this year's events into something that can be a benefit, or can be, we can make the best of, and yeah. I think a lot of us have gotten more time for creative projects. A lot of us have gotten more time for all kinds of things that we might do within the comfort of our own homes.
Yeah, I really love homeschooling my kids. It's
Mm-hmm.
my jam. I love it. Again, I was a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, thought I wouldn't be able to do it again.
Right.
Now I'm like, yes, I can teach my kids, and I'm having a blast. I love it.
Yeah, awesome. So that, that kind of thing, it's great to hear stories of people being able to turn the pandemic into something that can be a positive. Red Ninja EX has a question. What about for kids, though, with the pandemic? They cannot socialize with others their age. So is it bad to let 11-year-olds play Fortnite, which makes them aggressive? Interesting question. What do you think?
Oh, wow. Yeah, my daughter's 10 and my son is 8. And I do worry a little bit about them with, socializing, because it's been a while now. My son is super friendly. He's like the friendliest little guy. So poor little extrovert is suffering and misses his friends dearly. And then my daughter, she's actually the opposite. She's very bookish and doesn't have a ton of friends. So she's just like, whatever, like all the introverts are.
Sure.
And so I'm actually more worried about her, because she was the one I was always pushing, like, who are you going to have a play date with this week? So I've been working to do like kind of socially distanced play date things. I find bike riding is a good socially distanced play date, right? Because they're not going to get within 2 meters of each other when they're riding around,
Yeah,
so if
that's
cool. Masks, it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say also, obviously, I am far from a child psychologist. I am not a parent, but it seems to me from the way that you're asking the question, Red Ninja, it sounds like the issue is the aggression, right? The issue is you're saying it makes the kids aggressive. So what I would encourage you to think about is, do we want to take away Fortnite, which is something that they enjoy, because it makes them aggressive, or do we want to encourage them to enjoy what they do in a way that is less aggressive, or do we want to try to figure out why Fortnite makes them aggressive? Because speaking as someone who plays a lot of video games, I don't believe that video games make people aggressive. I believe that people respond to video games in a way that mirrors the way they respond to certain types of situations in real life. And I think
I want to mention something about that too.
Sure, go ahead.
So my son, when he was younger, because, he went through this trauma too, he had a mom who had cancer, and then the divorce and all that. And so he went through a really angry period where he was lashing out at classmates and just really not trusting humans, and it was bad. And so I actually signed him up for this video gaming system called Mightier. And
Okay.
it's like, it's a tablet, and you play these games, and you wear this armband that measures your heart rate. And the games are designed to get more frustrating as your heart rate increases, right?
Oh.
So they're like these games that just torture you. And then this thing pops up with like this dragon who's like, hey, I see that we got to capture all these anger monsters. So let's, because all these anger monsters start appearing on the screen
Hmm.
and like blocking your vision to tick you off even more.
Oh yeah.
And then they teach these different calming methods like deep breathing, and all these
Oh, that's
other
cool.
calming methods. And so my son actually used video games to get over his anger in that way. It was really awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. That like I'm always excited when I hear about people using video games in a positive way to teach kids, because the the way I see it is they're a technology unto themselves, and they're a medium that we're interacting with in all kinds of different ways. We're interacting on a visual level, we're hearing things, we're touching a controller or something like that, and we're getting all these stimuli, and we're interacting in a way where normally the only time we get that many stimuli is when we're interacting with something out in the real world. So it does change the way that we think, but at the same time, it engages so many different parts of our brain at once, right? And they can be such a powerful tool for allowing people to learn certain things. So allowing people to learn anything from hand-eye coordination to emotional regulation, like you mentioned, or just problem solving, creativity, things like that. So I certainly sympathize when it comes to I empathize when it comes to Red Ninja's problem here in terms of kids getting very pumped up about video games and like feeling like they're high energy all the time. But it may be that there is there's some game out there that they can play that will engineer a different response, or something that they'll react to in a different way. And it's probably natural for them to just want to play Fortnite all the time because kids love Fortnite. Fortnite is like the biggest game that everybody plays right now.
My kids don't play Fortnite, but they love Minecraft, and
Oh,
they play
cool.
Path of Exile, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of violent if you think about it, but it hasn't increased their aggression as far as I've seen. And yeah, screen time management is just a thing nowadays that you have to
Mm-hmm.
do. It's
Yeah.
good for adults too. No screen time right before bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to do that. I'm okay about it. I don't think I'm as good at it as I could be. I'm good at not being in front of my phone before I go to bed, mostly. But what's harder is actively doing something where there's no screen on. So like being off my phone and turning the TV off and like just reading a
Yeah.
physical book or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm quite bad at that because I don't have a ton of physical books in the house. I just have a Kindle and I have like other things that keep me occupied. So it's that's a work in progress for me. I don't know if there's anything else that's a work in progress for you in that sense, but
Oh, a lot. I'm really good about sleep, though. I mentioned that
okay,
sleep
yeah.
is my main trigger. So I am like super, super into sleep hygiene and being really
Mm-hmm.
good about that. So I'm on top of that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have a sleep problem, but I definitely think there's a lot of things that I'm weaning myself off of. But most of those are just maladaptive behaviors that I developed in like previous relationships,
Mm-hmm.
like mothering people who aren't my children, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Those are things I have to cut back on.
Sure. Kat asks, has everyone watched The Social Dilemma? I haven't watched it yet. I
Neither.
did. I heard some criticism of it from Jen Shahad on Twitter, whose opinion I really respect about almost anything, and I am curious to see it because she didn't like it. A lot of other people I've seen did like it. Yeah, and I'm really unsure what to think. So I'm definitely gonna check that one out. Red Ninja says I stream his games on Twitch, then I discipline him for bad behavior or being being douchey. Um, yeah, I mean, like I say, I am very far from an expert. I don't have kids. I don't intend to have kids, so I am not the one to be giving advice here. But I don't know, Alex, if there's anything that's come up that that you think might be helpful in that regard. for Red Ninja
Well,
there?
I think it's so individual kid based, like that's the thing with kids. Like even when you have like your first kid and then your second kid comes along and you're like, "Oh yeah, I know all about this." And then the second kid is just like totally different from the first.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just so incredibly, you know, based on what kid it is. But yeah, social networks too, they can be addictive. I'm taking a break from Facebook right now because for my mental health
Mm-hmm.
because I had a really bad experience on Canadian Thanksgiving where a neighbor hit on me via Facebook, and
Oh, geez.
it just really, really triggered me because of everything I went through with my divorce. And I just
Yeah.
really couldn't cope with that. And I told his wife immediately. And then I was just like, no more Facebook.
Yeah.
So right now, it's like the first time I'm not tempted to check Facebook. It's like, no, 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 that icon is lava.
I've been through that too. I disconnected from Facebook in I think it was New Year's Eve 2017. So it was like it was the beginning of 2018 basically. And I have not been back because my life is so much better without it. Like honestly, I think in the last 2 years, from everything I hear from people that are still on there, it's degenerated into like just a complete nightmare of a dumpster fire of a place.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I'm not there anymore because Twitter is by far enough for me. I've met a lot of great people on Twitter, many of whom are in this chat. So I love Twitter, but Facebook, like I am not touching that forever, pretty much.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's good for me. Kat says it's pretty toxic. Yeah, I mean, it really is. Ramen says Facebook is the new MySpace. That's very true. MySpace just disappeared off the face of the planet, and I hope Facebook does as well. Twitter, I'm not so sure about. I think there are upsides to Twitter. I think that Twitter we have to know how to use it. I have done a lot of moderating of my Twitter feed over the last 6 months or so of like just muting people that I actually don't care about, or like I'm like I was following a certain person and then I was following them because they're in my field and I feel like they might say something interesting at some point, but then every time I see one of their tweets I'm like, ugh, you're really obnoxious or something like that. And you just unfollow them, you mute them, and Twitter just gets better. And then, someone says something stupid to you in response to a tweet and you're like, this person's kind of a dick, and you just block them and Twitter gets better. So when you do that consistently over time, your Twitter experience does get a lot better.
I actually saved that post of yours because I was like, you got a good point there. Because I think I give people too much leeway, because I'm too positive. I always hope the best for people, and so I give them too much rope.
That's how I was for a long time. But I am merciless now. As soon as someone says something that I'm just like, if it's the kind of thing where they say it and you're like, I have a choice of either ignoring this or getting into a long argument about it, because when they say this thing, it reflects that they have the completely inverted perspective on this thing to what I do, because they disagree with me very strongly. As soon as I see that, I'm like, okay, this person is never going to change their mind because of something I tell them on Twitter. I can't be bothered to go through the time it would take to explain this thing to them. And the reason that they replied to me in the first place is specifically because they disagree, which means they're looking for an argument. Anybody who's in that category, who's just looking to get antagonistic on Twitter, I'm like, don't need you. Block. Yeah. Goodbye. And a friend of mine, in fact, it was Dr. Rob Tarswell, the first guest that we had on this show, introduced me to a thing. It's a Chrome app. It's called Twitter Blockchain. And it's you can go to a Twitter page and look at somebody's followers, and you can run it on this page, and it will block everybody who follows a certain person. So wow. if you take like all of the, like what Dr. Rob said he did is he took like the 5 or 10 most prominent like white supremacist Twitter accounts and just blocked everybody who follows any of those Twitter accounts. And now his Twitter interactions are like completely devoid of anybody who has any interaction with that part of the internet. And so this seems like a really cool tool that I'm eventually going to get around to using to like filter my Twitter interactions so that anybody who is poisoned by this sort of crazy conspiracy theory right-wing portion of the internet that nobody really wants to associate with, I can just like basically lop off that portion of Twitter and not have to deal with it. So that's my hope. But
yeah, that's awesome. I remember there was like a Chrome extension that I used during the 2016 US election that like turned all election posts into pictures of kittens. And that was awesome.
That's great too. Yeah. I mean, nobody, as a general rule, nobody has enough pictures of kittens in their life, right? I mean,
Exactly.
who's out there being like, nah, I don't need more pictures of kittens.
Yeah.
It's just not a thing. So, I think we're kind of reaching the point where we can wrap things up fairly soon, but I like to end on the most positive note. And ending on kitten pictures is a positive note as it is. But
Yeah.
I like to end on a note where I can give my guest the chance to convey something to people in a sense of advice or just a perspective that can, if anybody's going through something right now, if anybody is going through a rough time, what would you say to that person that might be based on your own experience as a way to sort of hopefully lift that person up a little bit?
Yeah, if anyone's out there who's going through something and feels like there's no possible way they can live their life after this thing has occurred, there's no possible way, I assure you, you can. You absolutely can. I want you to just imagine the little things, like for me, it might be brewing a cup of tea in my new life, in after whatever has happened. And if you can brew a cup of tea in that new life, you can breathe air, you can find love, you can make connections. All those things can happen. Maybe not right now. And that's okay. That's okay. But you can do those things in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic perspective. I think I would certainly second all of that for sure. So I think that about wraps it up. Thank you very, very much, Doc, for being with us. Thank you for all your insight. I think we all learned a lot about schizophrenia. We learned a lot about you. We learned a lot about the experience you've been through and how there are so many different demands placed on people who suffer from all kinds of different mental illnesses. And of course, I think we all intend to, take this learning forward and be as compassionate as we can to people who are in your position going forward. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate what you do. This is great that you bring light to all these things that hide in the darkness.
Thank you. I really appreciate that as well. I'm always going to be happy to hear that positive feedback. Like I said, I don't think there's any downside for that. So thank you. Thank you everybody for being with me. Dr. Alex, I'm going to let you hop off the Zoom call. I'm going to stay on for a bit just because of my weird Streamlabs thing that doesn't let me close down Zoom without hassle. So thank you. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. All right, guys. So thank you very much to Dr. Alex Chauran for the amazing perspective that she provided us today. That was a great interview, I think. I think she was very engaging and very good to listen to. So thank you, everybody, for being with me. However, the stream is not done. The interview is done, but the stream is not done. I'm going to be away for a few minutes. I have to close down Streamlabs and close down Zoom so that I can reopen Streamlabs so that I can start streaming from my PlayStation. Because today we're going to be playing more of one of my favorite games, The Last of Us, right here. The Last of Us Remastered on PS4. And today we're going to be finishing this game. So if you guys are interested in the end of this game, it's going to take a while. We still got a few hours left to play, but we're going to finish this game today. So thank you for being with me for this interview, and I'll be back in just a bit with the game. Thank you, Kat. Good luck. She wishes me good luck with the zombies. I will need it because this game is hard. So I'll see you guys in a bit. Take care.